If you are a telecommunications service provider, you know that there are plenty of opportunities for fraudsters to compromise your business. Your VoIP server is public and therefore exposed to hackers who want to find user passwords by brute force or denial of service attacks. And even if your own server is secure, your customers' passwords could still be compromised in many different ways on their PCs or smartphones. That's why PortaSwitch supports a wide set of features that can help you prevent VoIP fraud and protect your business from costly, unauthorized traffic. Today, we're going to take a closer look at some of these fraud prevention tools and show you how they work. VoIP fraud is a situation in which an attacker uses stolen credentials to send unauthorized voice traffic through your network. These credentials can be stolen from your customer's IP PBX or by exploiting the physical devices, like phones or computers, that they use to connect to the network. Hackers can steal a customer's VoIP password by tricking them into clicking on a phishing link. Luckily, PortaSwitch is equipped with tools that can prevent such attacks and stop fraudulent calls from passing through. The result? Zero losses for the service provider and for the customer. To help you understand how PortaSwitch helps prevent fraud, let's first look at how unauthorized traffic happens and why it can be so costly for telecommunications companies and their customers. If a hacker obtains a username and password from one of your customers, they can use those valid credentials to send their own calls through your VoIP system. And we're not talking about a small number of personal calls. Hackers will often target large companies that use SIP trunking services, since they have higher credit limits and are authorized to send larger numbers of simultaneous calls. Once they have secured valid credentials from one of these companies, they can send a massive volume of calls in a short period of time to expensive premium numbers that charge for each of those calls, which is how the hackers make their money. And since the calls will arrive from your VoIP server, you, the operator, are responsible for the cost of those calls to the telecom operator who hosts the numbers. Through this type of crime, companies can lose tens of thousands of dollars in just a few minutes. Worse, those numbers are often registered in countries with no legal framework to go after these hackers, which means the losses cannot be recovered. Here's the good news. PortaSwitch has many tools to detect, prevent, and avert this kind of VoIP fraud. Let's take a look inside PortaSwitch to see what these tools are and how each of them works. Let's start with the PortaSIP Cluster Protector. This acts as a built-in firewall for specific IP addresses, blocking network traffic that exceeds the reasonable number of requests that would be expected from legitimate SIP phones. This way, any hacker that is trying to guess a customer's password by brute force, in other words, by trying all possible password combinations, would simply not be able to do it fast enough, as it would take thousands of years to guess a password via what you would call a normal rate of a few requests. The fake positive response code safeguards against malicious scanners, which are bots that try to guess user passwords via a brute force attack that imitates the registration of a VoIP phone to the server. Even when the password is incorrect, PortaSIP replies OK to the request so that the scanner thinks it has succeeded and ceases its attack. But when the hacker attempts to use the password it presumes to be correct to make calls, it will yield no result. Instead, the call will be connected to an IVR explaining that the password is incorrect. This is very helpful for a genuine customer with a misconfigured VoIP phone, since they immediately know what is wrong, but it has still sent the fraudsters off track. Geo Profiles offer a proactive security measure by blocking call attempts or requiring additional authentication if a call is being made from an unusual location, as determined by the IP address, which cannot be changed easily. For instance, if a CSP selling a hosted PBX service in South Africa receives calls originating from an IP address in the Philippines, that usually means trouble. So, an admin can define that all calls from certain locations are blocked altogether. But what if there are locations where it would be unusual but not impossible for calls to originate from? For example, in the case of our imaginary South Africa CSP, what if an employee was on a business trip to Zimbabwe? For locations like that, the admin would set up a requirement for additional screening rather than blocking all calls. For example, if a call is made from a Zimbabwean IP address, PortaSwitch can provide a notification to alert the customer and redirect the call to an automated screening IVR. The user will be asked to provide an authentication code, and, based on their response, PortaSwitch will either authenticate or reject the call. Spending limits help service providers minimize losses from fraud by capping daily expenses on voice calls for customers. Say there is a small business that usually makes about 100 outgoing calls per day with a combined cost of about $10. If suddenly that business starts making calls for over $100 per day, this is suspicious. Of course, for a larger call center, the limit may be different and may also include different limits for specific countries and so on. Once a specific limit is reached, PortaSwitch sends an alert, allowing for prompt action to prevent further unauthorized activity. Overdraft protection is how PortaSwitch addresses the limitations of traditional authorization methods, which only check available funds at the start of a call. By those traditional methods, if a customer had, say, $6 available and made 3 calls to a destination that costs 10 cents per minute and that all started at about the same time, each call would be authorized to last 60 minutes. If the calls did indeed last that long, the total spending would be $18, fully 3 times what the customer had in their account. Overdraft protection ensures that this doesn't happen by adapting to changes in your customer's balance during each session. Funds on a balance are dynamically locked while PortaSwitch checks to make sure there is enough for the next period of a call, for example, for the next 5 minutes. And if a customer has several calls going at the same time, as each call progresses, they will each draw a small amount from the balance, based of course on the cost of calling the particular destination. In this way, it makes sure your customer's balance will be never overdrawn, even while concurrent calls are in progress. Every day, malicious bots are scanning every VoIP server that's out there, looking for vulnerabilities. We know this because the logs in PortaSwitch show us these brute force attacks, and that they've been defeated by all of the protective tools we've shown you here, whether that's the PortaSIP Protector, fake positive response code, Geo Profiles, spending limits, or overdraft protection. If you'd like to learn more about the security and anti-fraud features in PortaSwitch, please reach out to us via the contact details in the video description. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe to the Porta One channel to make sure you catch all our future dives into useful telecom, ISP, and IoT tools. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.